You're standing where George Washington's executive mansion once stood, home to the nation's first president from 1790 to 1797. But this house held a profound contradiction. While Washington conducted the business of a new republic founded on liberty, 9 enslaved people labored here in his household. The open-air exhibit before you marks where the house's kitchen and slave quarters stood. Notice the bronze outlines tracing the foundation, and the glass panels revealing the archaeological remains below. Among those who lived here was Oni Judge, who escaped to freedom in 1796 while the Washingtons prepared to leave Philadelphia. Her story, and those of the others who served here, remind us that the struggle for liberty has never been simple or complete. You're standing near the birthplace of organized abolitionism. In 1775, a group of Quakers gathered not far from here to form the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, the world's first anti-slavery organization. Their work was painstaking and deliberate, filing lawsuits to free enslaved people, lobbying legislators, establishing schools for black children. Benjamin Franklin later served as president, lending his name to a cause that demanded both moral courage and legal precision. Look toward the corner and imagine the steady traffic of reformers, lawyers, and freed people who passed through these streets, building case by case a framework for freedom. The Society's records, meticulous and vast, documented not just the machinery of slavery but the determined effort to dismantle it. Before you stands the Free Quaker Meeting House, built in 1783 by a group known as the Fighting Quakers. These men and women faced a profound dilemma during the Revolution. Their faith demanded pacifism, yet their conscience called them to support independence. For taking up arms or aiding the patriot cause, they were disowned by their meetings. So they built this modest brick sanctuary, a place where conviction could exist alongside dissent. Notice the simple Georgian lines, the Quaker restraint in every detail. By the early 1800s, reconciliation had emptied these pews, but the building remains as testament to those who chose country over community, bearing the cost of that choice in isolation. You're standing before the Arch Street Friends Meeting House, where Quakers have gathered in quiet worship since 1804. The building you see replaced an earlier structure from 1693, but the ground beneath your feet has been sacred to the Society of Friends since 1669. Notice the simple brick facade and the lack of ornamentation. This plainness reflects Quaker testimony, the belief that spiritual truth needs no outward decoration. Inside, wooden benches face one another in the traditional manner, waiting for the Spirit to move someone to speak. This community's commitment to equality and conscience made Philadelphia a crucial center for abolition. Many who worshipped here risked everything to shelter freedom seekers and challenge the institution of slavery itself. You're standing before Mother Bethel, the oldest piece of land continuously owned by African Americans in the United States. Richard Allen, born into slavery, purchased this ground in 1794 and founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church here. Allen had walked away from St. George's Methodist Church after being pulled from his knees during prayer. Notice the cornerstone at the building's base, marking where generations have gathered in faith and resistance. This sanctuary became a station on the Underground Railroad, its basement hiding those fleeing bondage. Allen's tomb rests in the lower level, and the church still holds services today, its congregation carrying forward a legacy of spiritual independence and social justice that began on this very soil. You're standing on a block that once held the homes of 3 remarkable men who shaped Philadelphia's early black community. Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, both formerly enslaved, founded the Free African Society here in 1787, creating the nation's first independent black mutual aid organization. Cyrus Bustill, a baker who supplied bread to Washington's troops, lived nearby. These weren't just residences but gathering places where strategies for freedom, education, and self-determination took form. The buildings themselves are gone, but notice the scale of these row houses around you. Imagine candlelit meetings in modest parlors where men and women built institutions that would outlast any structure, laying groundwork for Mother Bethel Church and St. Thomas African Episcopal, both still standing today. You're standing before the Christian Street YMCA, a cornerstone of black intellectual and cultural life in early 20th century Philadelphia. Founded in 1914, This building became far more than a gymnasium or lodging house. It served as a gathering place where ideas flourished, where community leaders debated the pressing questions of their time, and where young people found mentorship and possibility. Notice the building's solid brick facade, a testament to the permanence its founders sought in a city that often denied Black residents such stability. The Quaker commitment to education and uplift found expression here through interracial cooperation, though the very need for a separate institution reflected the painful contradictions of that era. Within these walls, generations shaped Philadelphia's civil rights movement. You're standing before the Woodlands, a neoclassical mansion completed in the 1780s for William Hamilton, grandson of Philadelphia's founder Andrew Hamilton. The estate once sprawled across 300 acres of carefully designed landscape, reflecting Enlightenment ideals of harmony between architecture and nature. In 1840, the grounds became one of America's first rural garden cemeteries, where prominent Philadelphians, including both Quakers and members of the city's Black community, found their final rest. As you look toward the portico, notice how the building's symmetry and proportion embody the rational optimism of the Revolutionary era. The surrounding trees, some dating to Hamilton's own plantings, still frame pathways where mourners have walked for nearly 2 centuries. You're standing where W.E.B. Du Bois conducted groundbreaking work that would reshape American sociology. In the late 1890s, the young scholar walked these streets, knocking on doors throughout the 7th Ward, interviewing 5,000 residents for what became the Philadelphia Negro. His meticulous study revealed how systemic barriers, not moral failings, shaped Black life in the city. Notice the rhythm of students passing by today. Du Bois understood that rigorous data could challenge prejudice, that careful observation might bend the arc toward justice. This building now honors his legacy, reminding us that scholarship itself can be an act of resistance, that listening deeply to a community's story matters profoundly. You're standing before 3911 Delancey Street, where Marian Anderson spent her childhood years. The contralto who would one day sing at the Lincoln Memorial and break barriers at the Metropolitan Opera grew up in this modest South Philadelphia row house. Her voice first found its power in the nearby Union Baptist Church, where the congregation recognized something extraordinary. As you look at these brick facades, imagine a young girl walking these same sidewalks to choir practice, her gift already evident but the full arc of her journey still unimaginable. Notice the intimate scale of the street itself. This was a neighborhood where talent was nurtured through community, where church and home formed the foundation of an artist who would move the world. You're standing before what was once the home of Dr. Nathan Francis Mossell, the first African-American graduate of the University of Pennsylvania's School of Medicine. In 1895, after facing exclusion from white hospitals, he founded the Frederick Douglass Memorial Hospital just blocks from here. It became a vital institution where Black physicians could practice and Black patients could receive care without discrimination. Mossell lived on this street during an era when West Philadelphia's tree-lined blocks were becoming home to the city's Black professional class. As you look at these row houses, imagine the determination it took to build parallel institutions of healing and hope in a segregated city. You're standing before a pair of Victorian mansions that speak to West Philadelphia's transformation in the late 19th century. As the streetcar lines extended westward, this area became home to Philadelphia's emerging professional class, including prominent African American families who built substantial lives here despite the constraints of the era. Notice the architectural details, the bay windows and ornamental stonework that reflect the aspirations of those who commissioned these homes. The Quaker influence that shaped early Philadelphia had established ideals of equality, yet the reality was far more complex. These blocks became a testing ground for those ideals, as Black physicians, educators, and entrepreneurs claimed their place in the city's fabric, building wealth and community in an America that often denied both. Before you stands Lemon Hill, the 1799 federal mansion built by Quaker merchant Henry Pratt. He purchased this land from Robert Morris, transforming it into a gentleman's estate complete with greenhouses cultivating the exotic lemon trees that gave the property its name. The mansion's elegant proportions and oval rooms reflect the refined taste of early Republic Philadelphia. Notice the symmetry of the facade and imagine the terraced gardens that once descended toward the Schuylkill River, where Pratt's horticultural experiments flourished. As a Quaker, Pratt embodied the tension of his era, a man of commerce and cultivation in a society increasingly confronting questions of liberty and bondage. The house later became one of Fairmount Park's first preserved historic sites. You're standing before the Freedom Theatre, a cultural cornerstone that has nurtured Black artistic voices since 1966. Founded by John Allen Jr., this institution emerged during the Civil Rights era as a space where African American stories could be told without compromise. The building itself once housed a Baptist church, and that legacy of gathering and witness lives on in every performance. Look up at the marquee. For over half a century, it has announced productions that challenge, celebrate, and preserve Black experience. Artists like Denzel Washington honed their craft on this stage. The Freedom Theatre remains what it was always meant to be, a place where community and artistry meet, where young people discover their voices, and where Philadelphia's cultural landscape is continually enriched. You're standing on an avenue that carries the name of one of Philadelphia's most formidable civil rights leaders. Cecil B. Moore, a Marine veteran and NAACP attorney, transformed this corridor in the 1960s into the heart of the city's Black Power movement. From his law office nearby, Moore led fierce campaigns to integrate Girard College and challenge discriminatory hiring practices across Philadelphia. The street itself became a gathering place for protests, community organizing, and the assertion of Black political power. As you look along this avenue, imagine the marches that once filled these blocks, the voices demanding justice echoing between these buildings, and Moore himself, confrontational and uncompromising, refusing to accept anything less than full equality. You're standing before the modest row house where John Coltrane lived from 1952 to 1958, years when he transformed from sideman to visionary. Within these walls, he practiced relentlessly, developing the sheets of sound that would revolutionize jazz. His cousin Mary, who owned the home, provided stability during a turbulent period of artistic breakthrough and personal struggle. Notice the quiet residential character of this block. It's easy to imagine those complex, searching phrases drifting through the windows on summer evenings, neighbors pausing on their stoops to listen. Coltrane left Philadelphia for New York in 1958, but the discipline and spiritual searching he cultivated here on North 33rd Street shaped everything that followed. The house became a National Historic Landmark in 1999, honoring both the man and the music born within. You're standing before Belmont Mansion, an 18th-century estate whose elegant Palladian lines belie the dangerous work that unfolded within. This house served as a station on the Underground Railroad, offering shelter to freedom seekers moving north through Philadelphia's network of safe havens. The mansion's position here in Fairmount Park provided both seclusion and access to routes leading towards safer ground. As you look at these walls, consider the courage required on both sides, those who risked everything to escape bondage, and those who opened their doors knowing the legal consequences. Notice the windows facing the wooded hillside. In darkness, they would have been watched carefully, a lantern's placement signaling safety or warning to those approaching through the trees. You're standing before Mount Pleasant, one of the finest Georgian country houses in colonial America. Built in 1761 for a Scottish sea captain, this mansion represents the height of Philadelphia elegance in the years before independence. John Adams himself called it the most elegant seat in Pennsylvania. Notice the symmetry of the facade, the Palladian windows, and the way the house commands its hilltop setting. Benedict Arnold purchased Mount Pleasant as a wedding gift for his bride in 1779, though they never lived here. The house later became part of Fairmount Park's preservation efforts. As afternoon light falls across these walls, imagine the carriages arriving from the city below, guests gathering in rooms where wealth and ambition shaped the course of a young nation. You're standing before Ormiston, the most intimate of the Quaker-built mansions that once graced this landscape. While its neighbors commanded attention through scale, this house spoke in quieter tones, reflecting the Quaker values of simplicity and restraint. Built in the 18th century, it served generations of families before the city transformed this hillside into parkland. Notice how the late afternoon light falls across the grounds where the mansion once stood. The building itself is gone now, but the terraced land still holds the memory of formal gardens and daily routines. This was a place where Quaker principles of equality and plain living shaped domestic life, even as the institution of slavery cast its shadow across the young nation. You're standing amid what were once elegant Quaker summer retreats, where Philadelphia's merchant families escaped the city's heat and yellow fever epidemics. Laurel Hill, built in 1767, commanded sweeping views of the Schuylkill River below. These estates reflected a particular Quaker paradox: plain in worship, yet prosperous in commerce, creating homes of refined taste without ostentation. Notice the deliberate positioning here on this bluff. The river wasn't merely scenic, it was the highway of trade that built these fortunes. Cedar Grove and Laurel Hill stood as country seats where families like the Rawls cultivated both gardens and the social networks that shaped early Philadelphia. The morning light catches the landscape much as it did for those 18th-century residents seeking respite and renewal. Before you stands Strawberry Mansion, the largest Federal-era residence in Fairmount Park. Built in the 1790s and expanded over decades, this graceful structure takes its name from the strawberries once served here to visitors arriving by carriage. The mansion's history intertwines with Philadelphia's complex past. It housed both wealthy merchants and later became a site where free black Philadelphians worked and lived during the 19th century. Notice the symmetry of the facade, characteristic of Federal architecture, with its balanced windows and refined proportions. The building witnessed the city's transformation from colonial port to industrial center, sheltering lives both privileged and constrained by the era's rigid social boundaries. Today it stands as a reminder of the layered stories that shaped this landscape. You're standing before what was once known as Doctors' Row, where elegant townhouses lined these blocks in the early 20th century. This neighborhood became home to a remarkable concentration of black physicians, dentists, and medical professionals who built thriving practices here when segregation barred them from white hospitals and institutions. Notice the architectural details that remain on these facades: bay windows, decorative cornices, the generous proportions that spoke to professional success and community pride. These weren't just residences. They were places where black Philadelphians could receive care from doctors who understood their lives, where waiting rooms became gathering spaces, and where medical excellence flourished despite systemic barriers. The legacy of their determination still echoes along these streets. You're standing before Stenton, the 1730 Georgian mansion of James Logan, William Penn's secretary and one of colonial Philadelphia's most powerful men. Logan was a Quaker who wrestled publicly with the contradiction of slaveholding, yet enslaved at least 9 people here over his lifetime. As you look at these brick walls, consider that enslaved hands likely helped build them, tended the surrounding fields, and maintained the household that made Logan's intellectual pursuits possible. The mansion preserves this uncomfortable truth rather than erasing it. Notice the dependencies flanking the main house, where much of the estate's daily labor unfolded, revealing the human cost behind Philadelphia's early prosperity and the moral complexities even progressive Quakers faced. You're standing before Belfield, a Georgian mansion whose history reaches back to 1711, when Quaker families sought refuge from the city's summer heat in this rural landscape. The estate passed through several hands, but its most significant chapter unfolded when it became connected to Philadelphia's abolitionist movement. Quaker principles of equality and conscience found expression here in quiet acts of resistance. As you look at the facade, imagine the conversations that took place within these walls, where moral conviction often meant risking social standing and safety. The grounds you see today were once part of a working farm, a place where ideals met the practical work of building a more just society. Before you stands Grumbilithorpe, the 1744 summer retreat of the Worcester family, German Quaker merchants who shaped Germantown's character for generations. The house witnessed both the ideals and contradictions of Quaker life. While the Worcesters embraced principles of equality and simplicity, they also relied on enslaved labor well into the 18th century. Notice the modest stone facade, typical of German colonial architecture, its thick walls designed to keep the interior cool during Philadelphia's humid summers. During the Revolution, British General Howe used these rooms as his headquarters after the Battle of Germantown. The grounds you're standing on hold layers of stories, of those who lived here in freedom, and those who labored here in bondage, their names largely unrecorded but their presence undeniable. You're standing before the Deschler Morris House, where George Washington sought refuge during the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. This handsome stone dwelling became the nation's executive mansion that autumn, as Philadelphia's government fled the devastated city center for Germantown's higher ground. Washington returned the following summer, conducting the business of a young republic from these rooms. Notice the thick Germanic stonework, characteristic of the skilled craftsmen who settled this neighborhood in the early 18th century. The house also holds a more troubling history. Enslaved individuals labored here during Washington's residency, their presence a stark reminder that the struggle for liberty remained incomplete even as the president governed from this very doorstep. You're standing before Wake, a house that has witnessed nearly 3 centuries of Philadelphia life. Built in the 1690s and expanded over generations, it remained in the same Quaker family until 1973. The Haynes family who lived here were deeply committed abolitionists, their beliefs rooted in the Quaker conviction that all people possess an inner light. This home served as a station on the Underground Railroad, offering shelter to those fleeing enslavement. Notice the rose garden stretching before you, cultivated since the 1820s and among the oldest in its original design in America. The same soil that nourished these roses also bore witness to acts of quiet courage, as families risked everything for freedom in the hours before dawn. You're standing before the Germantown Mennonite Meeting House, where in 1688, 4 men gathered to draft what would become the first formal protest against slavery in the American colonies. Francis Daniel Pastorius and his fellow Mennonites posed a simple, radical question: if we believe all people are created equal, how can we justify holding others in bondage? Their petition never gained official approval, yet it planted a seed that would grow for nearly 2 centuries. Notice the modest stone structure before you. In this quiet space, ordinary people chose conscience over custom, setting words to paper that would echo through generations of abolitionists to come. You're standing before the Johnson House, one of the few documented Underground Railroad stations still open to visitors in Philadelphia. Built in 1768, this stone dwelling sheltered freedom seekers as they made their way north, guided by the Johnson family's Quaker conviction that slavery violated divine law. The family risked prosecution under the Fugitive Slave Act, hiding people in the attic and cellar. Notice the thick stone walls and small windows, features that provided both insulation and discretion. Inside, you can still see the spaces where men, women, and children waited in darkness, listening for the signal that it was safe to continue their journey toward liberty. The Johnsons kept no written records, understanding that silence itself was protection. Before you stands Cliveden, the 1767 Georgian mansion of Chief Justice Benjamin Chew. These stone walls witnessed one of the Revolution's fiercest urban battles when British forces fortified the house during the Battle of Germantown in October 1777. Notice the scars still visible in the facade, musket ball marks that remain from that foggy morning's assault. The Chew family enslaved people here for generations, a stark reminder that even elite patriots participated in the institution of slavery. The mansion's dual legacy speaks to the complexity of Philadelphia's past, a site of revolutionary struggle built and maintained through the labor of enslaved African Americans. The house has preserved both stories, refusing easy narratives about freedom's birthplace. Before you stands Upsala, a federal-style mansion completed in 1798 for John Johnson, a wealthy Quaker merchant. The home's clean lines and symmetrical facade reflect the restrained elegance typical of its era. During the yellow fever epidemics that ravaged Philadelphia in the 1790s, Germantown became a refuge for those fleeing the city, and homes like this one sheltered families seeking healthier air. Notice the Flemish bond brickwork, a hallmark of quality construction in early America. Later, Upsala became home to generations of the Johnson family, whose lives intertwined with both Quaker principles and the complex racial dynamics of 19th-century Philadelphia. The mansion now stands as a reminder of how wealth, faith, and social change shaped this neighborhood's character.